Welcome to the Founder Experience, where we're charting the unpredictable waters of startup ventures. I'm Nathan Williams.
And I'm Alex Gutjahr.
A few weeks ago, I was talking with a friend about business and business ideas. And I said that one type of business that I will never, ever start and never touch with a 10-foot pole is a coffee shop.
Ooh.
Coffee shop. You wouldn't catch me dead touching a coffee shop. And she said, why? I said, because people have the coffee shop fantasy. Have you ever heard that before, Alex? The coffee shop?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So the reason is, and the reason I gave her was that everyone has this idea at some point in their life, especially if they're working at a company, that they would love to stop working for someone else, work for themselves, and they'll start a coffee shop. And it'll be a nice place. Maybe it'll be artsy. Maybe it'll be a great place to spend some time and sip coffee. What they don't realize is that they're very expensive to start and that they don't get to sit in the coffee shop. They have to run the coffee shop. And so at the end of the day, they've paid $500,000 to $1 million, put themselves into debt, and are working 60 hours a week for less than a minimum wage. I can say that. Minimum wage. And so my friend laughed at me, said, absolutely, this is absolutely correct. So anyway, I went with my friend and her husband to breakfast, and she tells me that she's considering purchasing a coffee shop. And my reaction was just like, no, do not buy a coffee shop. But she says, no, it's different. And what I wanted to say, and what I've been doing is I've been trying to evaluate. Obviously, some coffee shops can work. There are coffee shops all around a city, and there are coffee shops that do work. But the reason that these coffee shops that are started by people with the coffee shop fantasy don't work is because the fantasy does not equal the reality.
Yeah. So what was? I mean, so before we talk about that, let me share. Now that you brought up the concept or you coined the term, I realized I tried doing something similar. So I live in a small village, like really a village which is part of a bigger city, and like 2 kilometers away, they opened up new living area where they also rented out office space. So a year back, they offered the offices or the rooms there, and I've been thinking, okay, if I wanted to build something in a physical space, what would it be? And that's these offices are part of a larger living area that has just opened up. I'm not sure how many hundreds of families live there, but it's huge. So I thought maybe it's nice opening up a co-working space. So I even had the real estate agency that's selling these asked for a concept. So I just opened up PowerPoint and I thought, well, I just come up with an idea, I share it, and then I see how far it goes. If they say, fine, you can run with the concept, I think about the next step, which would be financing the whole thing. So I said, okay, I wanted to build a co-working space, and I call it Rocco, which was the name. For whatever, don't ask me why, I just thought it sounds fancy. And we speak about naming in a separate episode, but it's, I came up with that name and had a concept, and I thought, okay, just a co-working space alone doesn't make sense because that's hard to sustain. So I thought about, okay, it would be nice to have a cafe where people could get a cake and a coffee. And that it's similar to what you just mentioned. That sounded very romantic, right? I was like, oh yeah, that would be a nice space. Even I would like to be around. And we had these in the neighborhood. There would be so many people who usually work in Berlin, but then also have home office days most of the day during the week. They have families, so I can see why they would come in. And then I ran the numbers, and I thought, oh boy, this is so slim. The margins looked so slim. And then I thought, okay, now you just need something like COVID happening again, right? Something where people say, okay, no, you're closed down. You still have to pay rent, etc. And I saw these numbers and I actually thought, how can anyone make that sustainable, right? But I agree. It's like when you have that fantasy and you're romanticized with it and it feels like, oh, this is nice. Yeah, I would go there. You don't see the hard work. And as you also mentioned, just there's so many cafes out there, right? Like why would anyone go to you? Like why not? Like you usually can see another one from everyone where you go, right? So there's huge competition, and that's that's hard work, right? It's still a business after all, and it has to sustain itself. And I like the numbers I ran that looked very not good. Let's put it this way.
There's there's a lot of motivations, different motivations for starting something like a cafe or coffee shop. And one of the big challenges that people running cafes or starting with the coffee shop fantasy run into is the fact that their motivation isn't numbers driven. And their motivation is usually to have a lovely space
Yeah.
or to do things differently than other cafes have done. Um, one of the common ones, and this is one that my friend wanted to do, was an arts cafe. I've seen this concept many times where you have a cafe that's combined with an art space, and you can sell the art and you can sell the coffee, and then it's very artistic, and or maybe a mother's cafe. That's another one
Uh-huh.
where mothers can
Yeah.
come in and bring their children, and it's a safe space for that work group or that demographic.
Hmm.
And I think part of the reason that this doesn't work is that it's effectively the Starbucks model but worse, right? Because if you think about it, Starbucks was very, very successful because they were the first coffee shop that their main product wasn't coffee. Their main product was having the third space, the space that people would spend their time in. And they could mark up coffee to be $7, $6, $8 because they invented their own language to go with it. Do you want
Hmm.
a venti? Do you want a tall?
Yeah.
They had their own culture. They were the first to have baristas that could talk to you about the history of the coffee and where it came from. Like it was an entire culture that was built around this space so that people felt this is my home. This is like if I'm spending a third of my time at home and a third of my time at work. The other third of my time is spent one other place. And if it's not going to a church, if it's not going to a club, then maybe it's going to the coffee shop. And
Hmm.
that's how Starbucks started in the 90s. That model isn't really working as well anymore. And Starbucks has moved away from the third space model. Other people have tried to copy it, but that's effectively what it is. It's the idea of I'm going to make a welcoming space, a community space for this type of community to come and share and spend the time. But maybe that community doesn't exist, right? Starbucks was everyone who wants coffee can come here. And they created a culture around coffee. But if you're starting a mother's space or a father's space or an entrepreneur's space or a cat space or a art space, that's a much smaller group. And often the reason that those groups don't have a community already is because they don't have a lot of time availability or money availability. If you talk to mothers, they're not going to go every day to the coffee shop. And if they buy a coffee, it's
Yeah.
because maybe they have to because they're there, but it's not because they love or want coffee and want to spend their time in a coffee shop. It's because they're looking for somewhere that's appropriate to meet mother friends and they don't have a lot of time. Artists don't have a lot of money. It's the opposite problem. So they want to go somewhere where
Yeah.
they can sell their art, they can make their art, and who are they going to sell their art to? Other artists, maybe, because the other artists are the ones who are going to the coffee shop. And none of them are going for the coffee. They're just going because it happens to be coffee there. And so if you look around, there haven't been a lot of good examples of an artist coffee shop that have succeeded in the long term. Or same thing with the mother's coffee shop. Those two are the ones I hear the most. And that's why it's a dangerous business to go into. Because it's something that people who are members of those communities want to exist, but it's not numbers driven. Often as well, especially among artist communities, you get people who want to do it differently. They want to pay people fairly. Well, that's a red flag right there because it's already super slim margins. And it's
Hmm.
not that I wouldn't share that if I was in the same position, but as soon as you start increasing the amount you pay people, it has to come from somewhere. And if you've got slim
Yeah.
margins, that's a problem. So you have to start thinking, how do you solve that?
Yeah, and I mean, especially with the competition, you cannot raise prices all the time because people wouldn't just say, "Okay, I move somewhere else." Right? This is one aspect, and the other, if you come up with multiple things that you expect your target customers to share, like okay, they are artists, they are mothers, yeah, the smaller the potential client size, right? And then also what I've been thinking about is the whole demographics. Um, okay, like artists remain artists for longer. But if I think about that area where I've been looking, there are many families, but I mean, they will not. The kids grow up, right, and then probably their behavior changes, like from the mothers and other people who will go there. They will change, right? People will stay in and work in their homes once the kids leave the house, right? Then like I was thinking they would go to the co-working slash coffee space to have some like can get some work done without being distracted because the kids are always at home, right? So they want to get away, and because I know that myself, if I'm sitting in the office and the kids are at home, they just drop in. They don't care, right? That's fine. So, but that will change over time, right? Kids grow up, so their interests may change, and then the question is, okay, what happens to that space? Is it still relevant a few years down the line? And I couldn't tell when I ran these numbers and tried to project it because it felt so random to get that data.
There's another aspect of the cafe or the coffee shop that often comes into play is that often it's a side business to the main business. You just described that with your co-working space. You had a main
Mhm,
business that's your co-working space, and then at the side you wanted to start a cafe. And the reason is because you see it as another revenue stream, but you don't realize when you start just how much of an investment and just how complex it is to actually run one. And there's a very good rule that I've heard before is never start more than one business at once because each business is complex enough on its own and each
mhm.
business should stand on its own. If you need a second business to make the first one work, it would be better just to keep the second business, right? Um, I was with my friend. I was asking them what their motivations were for doing this. And one was financial freedom so that they would be able to give up their jobs and work in the cafe. And this is a noble thing, of course. However, if you're making significantly less in that financial risk, you could just keep your job and open up the
Mhm.
cafe for free instead of buying it, right? Like you could just open up a space and then, have your own space rather than buying a cafe from someone else.
Yeah.
Just find a better paying employment or something like that. Similarly, we were talking about different revenue streams for such a cafe that we could they could sell the art that was produced or they could host events. That's already three businesses. You can have an event space, you can have an art space with a membership where you sell art as well, or an art shop. That's four businesses. Or the cafe.
Yeah.
and all of them together become extremely complicated to run.
Yeah, and I think this is also something that I encountered many times. That you think about a problem, and on the surface, it doesn't seem too complex, but reality is always much more complex once you dive into the details, right? Because there are so many unknown unknowns that just reveal themselves, especially if you're not a domain expert or haven't done this thing before. As I said, hardware for me is something that I wouldn't even know where to start. But I'm sure even as I would get started, I would encounter so many more things that are super complex, and then you have to solve them. And I would expect the same for even a cafe, right? Especially if you start offering food, you have to think about okay, you need supply, you have to keep it cool, like you have to prepare it. Like, there's so many tiny steps that are just beneath the first level, right? When you just scratch the surface, you see, oh, like, it's getting very complicated. So I just wonder, are there any good examples where we would say like shops businesses where this has worked, or where I would say those do exceptionally well?
Well, obviously there are cafes that have worked, and
Hmm.
there are cafes that do work. The the usual pattern for a cafe or any restaurant really that's going to work is knowing your niche, having the numbers work, and location. Those are the three. The most successful cafes that I've seen have been located in office buildings where you've got a
Hmm.
dedicated clientele. They get the coffee on the way to work or going out from work or to have a meeting at work. And it's something where it's very convenient and it's approximately the same price as anywhere else. So there's no real motivation to leave and go somewhere else. So there's quick turnaround. They don't entice
Yeah,
people to stay for 6 hours or 3 hours to get their work done. Instead, they make it so that it's very easy to get your coffee and then get out. And
get out.
exactly. And they may or may not have branding, but
Mhm.
they've got a very professional setup. And whether or not the coffee is the best at the cafe, or if it's sort of medium, at least it's not terrible. And so the coffee has to be good enough, and
Yeah,
it has to meet people's needs, and then the numbers just have to work. That's it. Um, and that the thing is with the slim margins, the the numbers part is really hard to work out, right? Because you need to have a good location. Good locations need to be financed. You need to renovate it. That costs money. You can get that potentially financed by the person renting it to you, by the company, but that
hmm,
will come with loan repayments. You can you can finance the machines that you need and the supply in different ways, but that will come with financial cost, the cost of capital. You can you can hire people to work at the cafe. That will cost you money. And so one of the things that I've seen, the mistakes that people do, is they don't count their own time into the numbers when they try to make it work. They look and say, well, I would like to pay myself at some point, but look, I'm only paying 2,000 in rent and
yeah.
500 in loan repayments and another 1,000 a month in supplies, and I'm taking in 5,000. So look, I'm making profit. No, you're not, because you haven't paid yourself yet, and you're now working 60 hours a week in the cafe. And and that's an important factor. And I literally have heard one person try to solve this problem by saying, well, I could get a partner and they can also work in the cafe.
For free.
And it makes somewhat sense, but then you realize, didn't you want to pay people better? And so now you're just splitting the equity and splitting the risk, but you're also having two people who aren't getting paid working at the
Yeah,
cafe.
it's like two people drowning, just holding on to each other, and then just trying to stay afloat, right? That doesn't work. And I've experienced that myself whenever I started a new business or idea, that I kept thinking, okay, I can offer my time and do this. But you're right, it's easy to just build yourself another job. And especially if you use that as a kind of escape rope from your existing job, it would
Mhm.
be much worth, right? So that it looks romantic on the outside, but then you at some point realize you're working, I don't know, 20, 40 more hours per week. You're getting paid less. So things are just going in the wrong direction. And this is also hard to accept, right? Because you can initially tell yourself, oh, at some point it will be fine, but then month will go on and pass, and then at some point you realize, oh, it's actually made things worse, and I hate this, right? So
Yeah.
this is the danger, going just that path and just thinking it's all nice, we'll figure it out, without running the numbers or being very clear upfront. And I think this is also fine. You can dedicate your time without paying yourself, but you should have a plan in place where it says, okay, this is only up until month 3, and from there it has to be profitable, and I have to get a proper salary, whatever, and be explicit, and then at some point also decide, okay, this hasn't worked out, so we have to kill this thing, otherwise it's just ruining our family or whatever.
This is true, and this can apply, as you say, to any business. Any business where you find yourself adding complexity and adding pieces in order to make the core idea fly is one that is in danger of having this problem, right? Because adding something profitable in order to support something that's not profitable usually doesn't work unless the not profitable thing is deliberately a cost center. It's deliberately something you're offering for free, right? So a good example would be Google searches don't make them money, but the advertising does, right? And they can't sell the advertising without the Google searches. Okay, so something like that can work. But if you find like you're running a coffee shop and then having to add art sales to it, that's not a core part of the thing.
It's also much harder to market. So I'm always a fan of do one thing and do it exceptionally well, right? Because you can really optimize it. You can be the best person or business delivering that service or product. And also, if you do so many things at once, it's really hard to market it, right? So I mean, if you go to people and tell them, look, I run a cafe. Oh, but there's a twist. We also sell art. Like people won't get it. Like maybe they do, but not all of them. And it makes it harder to come up with a targeted marketing to the outside, because it takes you more time and explanation so people understand what your business is about, right? So I'd rather say, okay, we are the best at doing X, and this is why it's so catchy to have these comparisons like Uber for cats, Facebook for cats, whatever, right? Because people will immediately get it. It makes it much easier. But the more you add and the more complex your offering then also is, the harder it is to market and explain what you're doing.
Do you remember at one point you and I were talking maybe a few weeks ago, and I said it's much easier to monetize an audience than it is
Yeah.
to find an audience for your monetization model. This is a prime example of exactly that. If your unprofitable adventure or your minimally profitable business is generating the audience, right? It's core to generating the audience. And then you sell them something like a cafe. That can work, right? A movie theater. You're going to make money by selling movie tickets. Maybe it's not going to be hugely profitable. Hopefully it'll be at least somewhat profitable, but that draws the people, and then you can sell them refreshments.
Yes.
That's not too crazy, right? The co-working space, maybe. If people are coming for the co-working space anyway, sure. I wouldn't start them at the same time, but
Yeah.
it's something where you first get the audience and then you add something else. If you don't have the audience, or if your audience is coming for the cafe and then you're trying to add on something else and neither of them are profitable and neither of them are really going to increase it, and they just increase complexity, that's where it becomes a problem. And there's going to be all sorts of spectrum of gray area in the middle. But what you really need is one strong thing that gets you like, this is my audience and I've got an audience and the audience is coming. Now I can sell them something.
That's it for this episode of The Founder Experience. If you enjoyed it, do us a favor, hit subscribe wherever you are listening, whether that's Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. If you've got a second, leave a rating or a review. It really helps. And you can find more episodes and behind-the-scenes stuff on our website, founderexperience.fm. And if you've got feedback or business ideas that you want us to talk about, shoot us a message at hello@founderexperience.fm. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for hanging out. We'll catch you next time.